Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the IBME UBU show. I'm your host, Antoine, and today is joining me a very special guest, none other than James Baker. James Baker is a California licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice for over 20 years, and also the creator of the Integrity Reset, which is a structured, no nonsense process for men in the wake of betrayal who are ready to face themselves, take responsibility, and rebuild integrity from the inside out. James, I'm super, super, super excited to talk to you. I know that we've been planning this for a while and I've been chasing you, and I know you're super busy. So I'm so grateful that you carved out some time. Um, what didn't I say about you and who you are that you think people should know?
Well, first of all, good to be here with you, Antoine. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and share a little bit about me and what I'm doing. Um, so you said some of the most important things, I guess. Um, I'd say that just to give a little more, flesh it out a little more. In my private practice, which I have been doing for about 20 years, I'm working primarily with men and also couples. And then my the program that I've started, the Integrity Reset, is really set up to help men specifically, men who've had or who've committed broken trust with their partners. And those it grew out of my practice sort of organically. So we can talk a little bit about that. I think those are the most important things to mention at the start.
Wonderful. So let me start with what got you. When did you decide that becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist was the thing for you? Did you know that early on in life, or were there other things that you did, before you sort of found that this was your passion?
No, I didn't know for a number of years. I had a whole nother career. I worked in marketing and advertising and ultimately became a manager in large ad agencies in New York and then San Francisco. And I was on the production side. And it wasn't my intention to move into that area or even to work in that role as a manager within a corporate environment. However, it just organically happened over the course of the years in that work. And during that time, especially after I moved into management, I was working with people in a capacity where, and I'm sure this is something that's probably familiar to you and many people that you work with, many people viewing this, but there is an element of psychology that's very important in that role, regardless of the environment. So that was always a kind of going on in the background for me. And it wasn't until my mid to late 30s that I started to do deep exploration in other fields. I felt like I wanted to move out of the kind of work that I was doing. It wasn't fulfilling a part of me, something that I felt really connected with, kind of a deeper sense of who I was. Even though I really appreciated what I was doing and the people I was working with, but I just needed to do something that fit me a little bit better. And I had done therapy for many years. I knew some people who were studying to become therapists or who had just become therapists at that time. And during the career exploration, I started to consider that as an option. And like I said, I was doing therapy. I was working with a wonderful career coach at the time. And as I started to explore the psychology and the possibilities of doing work in this field, I got more excited and started to realize this might be a good fit. And I remembered at some point that when I was a kid, I remember doing my best. I was a teenager to be emotionally supportive of my mom, who was struggling with some serious health issues. And she said, you'd be a good therapist, and just kind of tucked it away. Didn't rise to the surface until I was in this process and starting to realize it actually might be a good fit for me. And so I did a lot of interviewing of people who were in the field, exploring education opportunities in the field, and then decided to bite the bullet and give it a go. And really always wondering if it was truly a good fit, knowing that until I was sitting with a client, which is it's a long process to get there, with school and training, that it was a good fit, and it was. So, it felt like it was a little bit of a leap of faith. And I've always admired people who take leaps of faith in career because it's so easy to get stuck. And I had some role models who had done it in other careers. And so, yeah, so it felt like the right fit for me immediately. So I just, I was working at agencies at the time, but always had my toe in a private practice during my internship, which is it's a phase that we go through when we're training. We need to get at least 3,000 hours. And then my practice just continued to grow. And at a certain point, I felt like it was viable to just switch to private practice work. So yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. And I made that change when I was, like I said, mid to late 30s, and I'm 60 this year. So it's been an interesting ride, but
Yeah.
it worked out, and I really enjoy what I do in a way that
Yeah.
I've never enjoyed anything before. So.
Yeah, that's a great story. I've encountered people in my life I know that are doing a job that they're not really happy with, but they do it because of the money, and they're really passionate about something else, and sometimes they don't even know what that is. And I'm sure maybe even in your practice, you've met people that needed to make a switch, but maybe were not ready or afraid to. How do you help people maybe overcome that fear? And what are some of the factors that lead people to prevent them from changing course and trying to find what will truly make them happy?
Mhm. I think that there's obviously a fear of not making enough money, of not being able to sustain themselves financially, especially if you're more advanced in your career, which I can relate to because I was at the time when I made my switch as a manager it was Young and Rubicam in San Francisco. And so I can really relate to this fear, and it's a real fear. It's a legitimate fear. I would never tell anyone just make a leap. It's really important to explore and get a strong sense of what you're passionate about, but also the sustainable ways to get there. I mean, you have to you can take a leap of faith, but you need to kind of put the pillows down on the ground before you leap to have as soft a landing as you can. Also, accepting the fact that there might be hardships involved in that transition, which there very invariably probably are. So that's the fear of losing income, the fear of being unsuccessful. When I was practicing, before I started practicing, before I started studying, when I was considering and I was talking to colleagues back in my old career, many of them were expressed fear to me. They expressed sort of a vicarious fear of what was going to happen to me and wondered how I could do this. I'd already done a lot of work in getting ready to make that leap, but it was interesting just the external messages I was getting from a lot of people, which is why I think it's so important to do the inner work to make sure that that this is the right path for you. It feels like the right path. And then also the prep. So I had been doing that. So it was possible for me to weather all of this negative input that I was getting. People who were, they were caring, but who just maybe didn't have faith in themselves to make such a change, had fears of their own, and kind of put that on me. So, which I can understand. So I was ready to weather that and to just proceed. It was scary, but I did. So I work with people on helping them get in touch with part of it has to do with getting in touch with them, true self, so to speak, how they feel, what their values are, their likes and dislikes. And this is a thing that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people don't take time to identify values. This is a big part of the work I do with like all kinds of clients. But without that, we're sort of compassless. We are doing things for maybe the wrong reasons. So that's a huge part of it for me, is helping those people who are considering career change to really look for the inner guidance that's going to help them uh, move forward in the direction that's appropriate for them, despite any external storms. And this relates to a lot of things. It relates to self-confidence. It relates to self-esteem. Those things. Emotional expression. Many other things. This idea of not being connected to our internal world. So helping move folks along, whether they're doing career change or wanting to do career change and feeling unsatisfied, or just feeling a little bit more generally lost, career wise, relationship wise, life wise. That's a key thing.
Yeah, and what comes to mind is my oldest son, who's 17 and about to graduate high school and turning 18. And I remember being that age. And I don't even necessarily think it's an age thing, but just not knowing, well, what should I do? There's so much that I could do, but I don't know what I want to do or should do. Um, and can often lead to just inaction and sort of just kind of wandering maybe aimlessly. You talked about the values, core values, and using those to help shape. How do you help people figure out what their either values are or what their sort of what their why is? Let's say taking a page from Simon Sinek, like because so maybe some people want to make a change, but they just don't know what.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a formal values exercise that I like to use with my clients that can take the form of just note cards with values written on them. It's fairly easy. If you go online, you can find a list of values if you don't already have a sense of what values might be. And most people who haven't done something like this or really spent time thinking about it, they don't necessarily even know what values are. They may know a few, but they don't really have a broad sense. And it's helpful to have a pretty hearty list of values. And sometimes I'll work with people in different arenas of their life. So it might be more career oriented values. It might be more relationship or life values. A lot of times these things overlap, but also can be different. So we start with a number of values. I ask people to write them out on index cards, lay them out on the floor, start to organize them in terms of maybe some of the ones that are most important to them. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's a few more, and then start to explore why. That's something we'll usually do together, but I ask them to do a little thinking on that by themselves. And also rank them in terms of priority. It can be really hard to limit it, but we're not tossing out values. We're just prioritizing values. And that can be an eye opener for a lot of people. They realize sometimes that, for work, for example, we'll have them create do the same exercise with the work values, the values of their employer or even their profession. And then we'll have them do their own value organization, compare the two. And a lot of times there's a discrepancy. And so that's, values exercises of different kinds, but that's sort of the format I use. I like for people to work tangibly with things that they can spread out and play around with and reorganize. I've also been developing an online version of that. But I'd say another thing that I do, and this might be more appropriate for a 17-year-old, but I think it's really helpful for adults too, is to, just think back, think about how we used to, before we started to kind of fall in line and adult, we played. And so thinking back on the ways that we played, the things that were important to us when we were young, getting back in touch with that part of ourselves can also help guide us towards the things that are truly meaningful to us. And so that's another thing that I'll do with folks who are trying to sort through that. There are some sort of surrounding tools that I'll use that are helpful for this, that have to do with really tuning in to the self, sometimes somatic techniques that help a person recognize feeling within themselves, physical feeling that relates to some emotion or um, often unrecognized emotion. So we'll do some somatic exercises that have to do with just tuning in, akin to meditation and mindfulness practices, but really focused on getting a stronger sense of self, and also talking about in their daily life, helping them to identify values in a less structured way and just a more general way, like talk to me about your day. What are you doing? What are you
Mhm.
wanting to do and not doing? Just in the day to day kind of experience, not even professionally, helping people get tune into to themselves. So much of what we're doing is reacting to others, especially if we're a busy guy or if you've got a family. It's just there's a lot to kind of keep our brains focused on other things and externally. So therapy can be a good spot to do that too, because we're turning off phones. We're we're focused on the inner experience among other things. So yeah.
Now, I know in your private practice, again, I know you've started about 20 years ago in your private practice or so, marriage and family therapy. Um, we're working with couples as well as individuals, both men and women, I assume.
I work with men and women in couples,
Okay.
but I work with mostly men individually.
Hmm.
It's not that I
Hmm.
haven't worked with women. It's just there's a bit of a gap, I think, in
Sure.
terms of availability of male therapists to work with men, and that's important to some men, not all.
Mm.
Some men want to do work specifically with a male therapist at certain points of their life. So yeah, men and women in the context of uh, relationships.
Got
Yeah.
it.
And just one other thing I'll mention about the license designation. So, licensed marriage and family therapist is the license, but it really covers therapy in general. It isn't specifically about marriage or families, but that's a part of a lot of the training is in relation to
Yeah,
family
yeah,
work, those
yeah.
kinds of couples.
So I want to explore, I think I gathered men's mental health is maybe one of your specialties or one of your areas of expertise. But I've been wanting to ask you first and foremost, because my belief is, but please correct me if I'm wrong, the foundation of a lot of this issues, misalignment at work, marriages maybe that hit some bumpy roads, mental health issues. Does it often lead or stem from unresolved childhood trauma or some trauma even as an adult? But oftentimes it's unresolved trauma from childhood, isn't it?
It often is. I would say that the way we define trauma really depends on context. And, sometimes we talk about adverse childhood experiences. Trauma, we often think of as more discrete things that happened, something bad happened to us. There's also the concept of more complex trauma that has to do with kind of ongoing, maybe parenting deficiencies, or even in some cases abuse, but more often just deficiencies. And I'd say, in terms of what I see most often, it's more to do with some things that parents weren't doing or providing or couldn't do or provide, that are crucially important for the development of a solid, grounded self that enters the world with self-confidence and is able to have healthy relationships with others. So, and often it is not because the parents intentionally doing something wrong. It's often that, a parent didn't learn a skill from their own parents, or they're too busy. Even if there's a large family, sometimes an adult who grew up in a large family will have been deprived of a certain level of attention because maybe another child required a lot of attention, or just it was a big family. And some parents are just busy. They're working a lot. They're not home as much. They're depending on older siblings, that kind of thing. So it's more, I would say it's more parents sometimes not being able to provide or knowing how to provide some of these more necessary ingredients to a well-rounded, healthy, happy child who then turns into a well-rounded, happy adult. But more so than like a specific trauma, like abuse, or even a one-time experience. Those things do sometimes cause trauma, later trauma, um, but yeah. So that's what I'd say. Normally, it's mostly it's about um, people growing up with parents not receiving something that was crucial for a child, things like attention. And that also makes it really hard, Antoine, for these people as adults to recognize that there's a like where some of their issues come from, because in many cases these are people who had parents who loved them very much, maybe express love, who took care of them, housed them, fed them, but just couldn't be emotionally attuned to them because of some of these reasons I mentioned, or or engage in other behaviors that just deprive the client, a child, of some of those foundational needs. I'd say that's the main thing I see in the people I work with.
Gotcha. And so
Yeah,
let's explore men's mental health, because again, I know that that's maybe your area of expertise or something you're
sure.
passionate about. What are some of the factors you think that are leading to? Well, let me ask it. Sorry, a different way. What do you think the current state of men's mental health is in this year 2026, and what are some of the uh, sort of factors affecting men's mental health?
Yeah. Well, my sense is that it's sort of both positive and negative, like positive and bad news. That I think there's a much more awareness of mental health issues just more broadly in the culture, which I think helps men. And I think it's helped men get over some of the stigma, to also just learn vocabulary. Just, cruising around online, you can find out a lot of actually good information that's helpful, I think. Destigmatizing of therapy, I think, can be helpful. Men's groups and other forums, I think, are really helpful. And there are many more of these options, I think, now than there used to be in the past, certainly when I was growing up, and probably you too. So that's a really positive thing. I think, I think that something that I see, there are through lines though from back then, that men are still generally in some way socialized in a way that minimizes internal experience, or recognition of internal experience, expression of that, including feelings. And also men have unique stressors that I don't think are always acknowledged by the larger psychological community, which is primarily, in terms of like percentages, there just aren't as many men in the field anymore. Therapists, psychologists, people who are doing research. It's good that the the profession has incorporated more women into the field over time, but it's challenging to find a male therapist these days, for example. So I think there are times when a male might want to work with a female therapist. In fact, I did therapy multiple times myself with different therapists, and I wanted to work with a female therapist at one point in my life, a male therapist at another point in my life. And this is, it's valid. We have, personal reasons for wanting to work with someone who maybe reflects or can relate to our experience growing up as a boy, or we want to work with a woman for other reasons. So it can be challenging to find men to work with, which I think is not particularly helpful. But I think that men in general um, often are maybe even more likely to feel stigmatized in certain ways, because they are they're told, not without merit, that they are maybe not deserving of attention. Their inner world's not just as deserving of attention, um, and and perhaps because men have dominated society and it's been a patriarchal system, that there's been too much attention on kind of what men need. And I'm generalizing here, and it varies obviously, but a number of men have come into me over the years feeling like they don't deserve to do therapy, even though they had specific things they wanted to work on. That somehow it was not okay to not just need help, which I think is the old script, but also that they're not entitled to it because of entitlement. They've got everything. They feel like they have all of the advantages of being male, which many of them do, but it can lead to minimization of some of the some of the things that actually could really help them move forward and become more whole human beings, more well-rounded human beings, work through trauma and things like that. But some guys come in and they just don't feel like there's a space for them, that they should take up space um, in I'd say in the therapy, maybe in some ways in their lives. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's some of the things I'd say.
Yeah, super helpful. I've got a million other questions I want to ask you that are
Okay.
related to this topic because I'm just fascinated with um, sort of the feminist movement and the effect that it's had on um, masculinity and defining what is it to be a man, how to be a man these days. Um, I grew up believing um, in chivalry. You open a door for a lady. You um, uh, um, walk her to the door, etc. You always pay for dinner, things like this. But some people might feel that that's not appropriate. So I know that uh, some men are just confused. And what is the right thing to do? Do I open the door for a lady, or if I do that, am I somehow insulting her? That she might think uh, I don't think she's capable of opening the door for herself. So I'll do nothing then. I don't know. I think it's confusing. Um, but I wonder, though, how much of my perception is based on what's being messaged versus reality. So, what I mean by that is, I think obviously our first influences at home are our parents, and men will look at their fathers, obviously, for the role model or how to be a man, let's say. But then you're influenced by external factors outside of the home, what you see on TV and what you see in movies. And I'm a little bit younger than you, but and I think I've seen men characterized differently over the years. From back in the '70s and '80s to sort of
Mm-hmm.
now. Um, um, so I think that perhaps again there's just sort of confusion as far as what is it to be a man. So, for example, like when it comes to this term toxic masculinity that I've heard floated around a lot, um, I've heard a couple of different definitions, and I just want to get your take on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, toxic masculinity can be men that display characteristics or behaviors that are toxic. To me, toxic equals bad, hurtful, harmful, narcissistic, what have you. Um, and it's a choice, right? We can do the right thing or we can do the wrong thing. But inherently, I don't think that masculinity is toxic. But I know that some people actually feel that way, that masculine traits are, in fact, just de facto toxic, and that somehow to become less toxic, you have to be less masculine. So, can you at least give me your definition, or is there a agreed upon definition out there? What is toxic masculinity? uh, and how do we, you know, change that behavior? Uh,
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really important point. That is very confusing to a lot of guys, a lot of us, because I think there are the different definitions that you mentioned. I don't generally like to use the term myself, because I think there are traditionally masculine traits that are positive and can be channeled in positive ways, and often are. And it, the door example you gave it's an interesting one, because I think, again, it probably depends on the participants involved and what the two parties want. I think, when I see things play out in relationships, which are, they're kind of long form versions of the door question. It's very much about increasing communication between the two about what they want and what they feel comfortable with for whatever reason. Their reasons are valid. So helping both parties respect the other's opinions and desires in a relationship. Sometimes it means compromising, etc. But, men are often bringing certain qualities or things into a relationship. I don't mean to say women don't ever, but or that all men do. It's varying degrees. It's a continuum. But a lot of things that I would consider positive masculine traits are, in truth, often really appreciated by women. And, I think the culture, whether it's culture wars or politics, it can be a little more extreme in terms of how this stuff is presented. When we get down to the individual level, it's much more nuanced for most people, and they're happy to have those kinds of conversations. So I don't really like to engage too much in that, but one of the things I do sort of do with this concept of toxic masculinity is that I think about the positive masculine traits, positive masculinity, that healthy masculinity that is an important part of many relationships, of many men's interaction with the world. Some of the things that we think of when we think of, I think, toxic masculinity are really often have to do with kind of what I was talking about before, like men being conditioned in a certain way to keep parts of themselves at bay, perhaps, or to hold shame around parts of themselves. And what that means is they are often not fully in touch with what's going on below the surface, with their needs, with their desires. This can build resentment over time. It can breed lack of self-esteem or even self-contempt. And some of the ways that this erupts, because it's not something we can tamp down forever, is violence, angry outbursts, cheating on partners. There are a lot of different ways that I think that this stuff that we call toxic masculinity comes to be. And to me, it's not about being a man. It's about how we're dealing with this internal world or not dealing with it. So a lot of times, I'm working with men who struggle with anger issues, who struggle with certain behaviors in a relationship that are classically toxic, but it's really, when it comes down to it, it's often about this internal lack of connection with self. And as a man sort of works towards that, whether in therapy or elsewhere, I don't think therapy is a requirement for this. I think that there's just less of that kind of acting out and behavior in their expression and their way that they show up in the world and relationships. They're able to sort of be more expansive in how they engage with the world. So, the door thing, to me, there are women who don't like it for certain reasons, and I think that's valid. There are some women that appreciate it. I would say there are also, there are men who will open doors for men or women just being polite to anyone. And I think that's kind of part of the equation too. And I think something to factor in. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there. My personal feeling about this, after spending a lot of time thinking about it, is not that it's a gender issue, but more of a just human issue. Do we enter into relationships with um, seeing others as equals,
Mhm.
treating them with respect, and um, generally um, try to make the right decisions, be a good person, versus making the wrong choices and being sort of a bad person. I think we're as humans we're all capable of good and evil regardless of gender. Certainly, men can display toxic behavior, and women can display toxic behavior. So to me, it's not a gender thing. It's more about just being a human being, whether
Mhm.
it's a professional relationship or personal relationship. It's a choice. We can choose to be toxic, or we can choose to be good people. Um, and I can say that despite what I hear on the news, and you see the worst of the worst on the internet, etc., I know by and large in my interactions with other people on the street, in my neighborhood, at the grocery store, at the mall, they're all pretty positive. I don't see people hating each other. I don't see people. So,
So,
so I think, what makes me feel optimistic and positive, and the message I share with anybody that's maybe feeling down about what they're seeing again on the news or things that are going on in the world, is that yes, there are bad things that happen in the world. People do bad things, but by and large, I have faith in humanity, and I have faith in the power of good, and that most people are good people and will make the right choices more often than not. Um, Now,
mhm.
you talked about infidelity in your last answer,
Mhm.
and I wanted to touch on that, and I wanted to segue before we run out of time
Yes.
to your integrity reset program. So, what is the integrity reset, first of all?
So I'll start by just explaining how I got here. So in my practice, because I work with men, I shouldn't say because I work with men, um, but some men have affairs. They breach trust in their relationship with their partners. And what I was finding over time was that, men would come to see me sometimes directed by a couples therapist that he and his partner, often female, were working with. So the therapist would suggest that he do individual therapy to address kind of what's going on. And just as often, maybe even more often, it's the partner who's wanting him or insisting or requiring him to do therapy as part of his repair work. So men were coming to see me to support them in repair work. A lot of the repair work is in couples therapy is about uh, sort of bandaging up the crisis, stopping the bleeding, stabilizing a couple, addressing her trauma at having been deceived, having lost trust with the person who she trusted completely. And that is a very important and huge part of repair work after infidelity. It's important. It's kind of what has to happen. So the focus is often on supporting that process, and part of that is often about helping the partner who's cheated to build trust and work towards trust with his partner. Obviously, the timeline is really up to the partner who's been betrayed because they're the one who have to get to a place of trusting again. But the partner who comes to see me is often feeling like there's a deficit in the couples therapy because so much of the focus is on some of these other aspects. They're not really doing individual type therapy where we're looking at maybe what's underneath the behavior. And I started to notice commonalities over time in terms of why men were having affairs, some of the behaviors that they engaged in, things that they were not really facing up to, parts of themselves they weren't acknowledging, the way they compartmentalized themselves in their lives, things that contributed to having the affair. That there are certain patterns that I see a lot. And so the integrity reset is really, I guess one other thing I'd say is that, therapy is often a deep, long-term process. Therapy is not cheap. It's a big investment for someone. So I wanted to create something that was a bit more targeted for men who didn't need therapy, but could really benefit from a targeted approach that allowed them to make the change happen in a more, let's say, concentrated way. And so, although I brought coaching elements into my practice as appropriate for these clients and others, this is really more in the model of a coaching program. So we're not doing therapy there. We're not diving deep into childhood trauma or issues. We're really trying to look at and help men understand like what they've done, why they've done it, and to have the support of me and other men in the program to practice new ways of engaging and talking about their experience, talking to their partners, taking ownership. A lot of times when men talk about what they've done, they do have a hard time taking ownership for what they've done. They might blame the relationship, they might blame, lots of different things. So it's about helping men to take responsibility in a structured, supportive way, and also learn ways to support the rebuilding and repair of trust. There are a lot of men. One example is men often really want to rush through the process of repair. Part of that is because they hate seeing their partner suffer. Part of it's because there's so much shame for a lot of these guys attached to what they did. And because it doesn't align with their values, it's very uncomfortable to sit in that place of acknowledging that, looking at it, and dealing with it. So part of what we're doing in this program is helping guys do that in a very intentional way, to not rush through it, to honor the pace that the partner needs to feel trusting and healed, but to also slow it down and really tune in to their own part of it. And that's, there are other things too that help support trust building, but how men engage with their partners and act, and how transparent they are, et cetera. These are things that are crucial ingredients for true trust to be built over time. So it's not instant, but we're doing 3 months of targeted work with the support of online materials, group work, and a support network of other guys who can relate, who will hold other men accountable. So all of that together allows us to just go deeper, do some of the, I think, more, in some cases, more useful work to help men develop skills, become accountable to themselves, and to others. That's part of it. And ultimately be the best partner they can be to their partner, which will help allow them to build that trust over time.
Now I'm looking at your website, and I'm going to share a link to your practice and the integrity reset in the show notes. I'm
Sure.
looking at the 4 pillars of integrity: radical ownership, understanding the wound, rebuilding trust. And the fourth one really sticks out to me. I was wondering if we could just explore it: emotional adulthood. Can you just explain to me what emotional adulthood? And if you need to talk about the others to make the fourth one make more sense, go ahead. But I'm just curious about emotional adulthood, and the reason why is because, again, to me, it comes back to that question I asked you earlier about childhood and childhood trauma. And oftentimes, I think a lot of the our actions as adults stem from our childhood and things that either happened to us or that we experienced, etc. So can you just help me understand emotional adulthood?
Yeah. It is part of I'd say there are a few pillars that are pillars. They're all related. Obviously, they're all supporting a larger goal here. But emotional adulthood is also related to what I was talking about before, about really tuning into the self, recognizing values, looking at discrepancies between values and how we're actually behaving and engaging with the world, working to change that, and working to take responsibility like an adult rather than blaming external forces. A lot of times, men who are not connected with that essential self, for lack of a better word, um, they feel helpless. They feel like they're victims of their external circumstances. And so they blame. So they'll blame the relationship, the partner for not wanting to have sex enough, or the relationship, partner not wanting to, whatever it is, like fill in the blank. Or, to expand it out beyond partnership, it's maybe feeling like they can't make change in their life. And a large part of that comes from not being in tune with the change that we actually want to happen. So it's a number of things kind of rolled into one, but that's a key component of it, is that connection. Now, if someone has a trauma that gets in the way of functioning in one way or another, they really should be doing therapy. And this can actually work in conjunction with therapy to really go deep and explore some of that childhood trauma. And there are ways to work with that. But this is really about supporting some of the things that might come out of that. But some men don't need as much of that kind of excavation or trauma specific work to get there. They sometimes just need to understand it. They just need someone to say, like, these are some of the things that you're doing, some of the behaviors you're engaging in, some of the ways you're not taking responsibility. And this is how you take responsibility. Does it happen overnight? No. But, it's part of the reason it's an intensive program, part of the reason it's 3 months long as opposed to a shorter program, and part of the reason why there's follow-up with the group and the other members is to support that ongoing growth. So it's at its core, I'd say probably the key point is about taking responsibility for one's actions in the world, and therefore, for the harm caused when there's infidelity, for example. Does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Antoine?
yeah. No, this is great. I love this. I just, again, some of the other questions I want to ask you. So,
Yeah.
and so can someone who cheats ever really recover from that? Meaning, um, if you go through counseling, decide to stay together, is there always that, 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years, well, you cheated on me and never forgot about that and I hate you for that. And is that typical, or do you find that couples are able to get past it and maybe not forget, but forgive and not revisit it?
Yeah.
Almost like a bludgeoning, every time something goes wrong, it's like you're going to bring up what happened.
Yeah. It's definitely both. I would say for some couples, it is not possible to get through that, to like rebuild trust, which is really important in a relationship. But a lot of times what I notice is that couples who really want to do the work, like they want to work on repair, they want to address what happened, and they also want to look at what was sort of underneath there. Sometimes part of it's always, I'll say the guys I work with, they're always responsible for their choice and their choices, right? But often there are things that weren't happening or working in the relationship before that. For example, something I see often is that some men are, this is kind of related to this idea of nice guy syndrome, they are not healthily assertive. And part of this might be because they're not in tune with what their own values are, which is part of how we develop healthy boundaries for ourselves, for example. They, in a relationship and over time, are not bringing things up to their partner, not bringing up issues or concerns. Sometimes they have a fear of of engaging that way with others, fear of confrontation, fear of that kind of thing with partners and others sometimes. And because they are not bringing things up over time, they're building up resentment. They're not practicing doing so, not practicing bringing things up, not having the opportunity to give a partner an opportunity to engage with them and work through stuff. They're just sort of shoving it down, and it sort of collects in the background. And it's as if this path of kind of going to a partner and saying, hey, I'm not happy with this aspect of our relationship. I want to work on it. They're not really in tune with what's going on. They feel like something's not right. They feel they're also kind of in the practice of maybe shoving things down or compartmentalizing parts of themselves. And they may feel resentment and be blaming a partner. And all of these things together can lead to the choice of having an affair. So if a couple comes to therapy and they're doing their own work, and for him perhaps it's about doing that work, that they and in the integrity reset program as well, they learn that they actually did have a choice earlier in this, that part of what's going on is they never learned to speak up in a healthily assertive way. They bottled things up and maybe only blow up or do covert things out of spite or out of frustration or feeling powerless. So for those couples, people who are willing to do that, and also, partners have to be patient because it does take time to rebuild trust. Time is it's the key ingredient, I'd say. Couples can come out of the other end stronger. A lot of couples come in and they say, when the affair happens, they tell me that they've started to have conversations like they've never had before. They're reaching levels of emotional intimacy that they've never had before. And that's hugely positive for a couple. It's unfortunate that that's how they got there. It's very clear. And I always discourage men from saying something like that in a couples therapy session, for example. I don't want to be saying in this couples therapy session that things are better now than they ever were because of what happened. But there is that opening. And if couples choose to engage this way, then they are having more emotional intimacy. Whether they decide to stay together or not, that can lead to a stronger foundation, less chance that someone's going to have an affair or hold back something and act out in some unhealthy way. So for those couples who do that, I often do see a stronger foundation, better relationship. Both partners are showing up in a new way. Does that mean that there aren't triggering things where the partner who was betrayed gets activated, for example? No, that can happen probably years on, but over time, this healthier foundation supports a healthier relationship, and both partners feel it. They feel that deeper level of connection and intimacy.
Mhm.
So I'd say it's a mix. Sometimes partners can't get beyond that, beyond the trauma, the pain that's been caused, and it's
Right.
totally understandable.
Right. So, okay. So, yes, infidelity is often the result of some other underlying issue that needs to be addressed, and really getting to the root of what that is. And if I understood you correctly, it's fundamentally about communicating. If there's issues on either side, one party should be able to express their feelings about the subject, and the other party should, if they're um, be willing to listen and hopefully make changes, compromise, resolve, etc. Which is why, frankly, I would think people would want to enter into a relationship in the first place, mutual respect and love. And yeah, I remember having a conversation like that with Alex, my wife, and I've been married now, as you know, over 20 years. I told her, I said, "Hey, I'm trying to be self-aware, but if I do something that's upsetting you, please speak up, because I might not know, and I'm happy to address it if you just tell me." And
Yeah,
so I would say to anybody out there, if you're unhappy, try speaking up, and if you're with the right
totally.
person, they will listen, and hopefully be willing to make change.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
I
want to
got
say, can I say one more thing about that though?
please,
Because I feel like it's
please.
important. That's so important what you're saying. I think, yeah, being willing to have conversations and even especially the hard ones is crucial. Like we have to be able to do it, and that's really hard for a lot of people. Um, but I would say, for the guys that I work with, often what I see is there's a relationship that's even more important, that is more fundamental, which has to do with the relationship with themselves. A lot of guys don't have that. They're really out of touch with themselves. And if we're out of touch with ourselves and we don't really know what's going on, it's really hard to bring something to a partner to express the feelings or whatever our needs are, because we don't know.
Right.
So that's often like the most foundational work I'm doing with a lot of
Yeah.
guys,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
I remember being there myself in my 20s. I was angry and I didn't know why I was angry, and I didn't want to
Mm,
talk about it because it was uncomfortable, because I didn't know the answers. So I get it. I'm with you there. Okay, two
yeah.
questions, last questions, and then I'll let you go because I know you're busy. Um, is When it comes to infidelity and the integrity reset, is, hey, I cheated because I'm a sex addict, is that a real thing or is that just a cop out? Is sex addiction a real thing?
um, yeah, there's some controversy, but I know that there is such a thing as compulsive sexual behavior. And that is like many process behaviors, issues related to food or even exercise, an unhealthy relationship with something that, ideally would be healthy and enjoyable and happy, a healthy part of our whole life. But if we have an unhealthy relationship with it, it can take the form of compulsive behavior that, like any addiction, can get in the way of functioning effectively in life. So yeah, it's a real thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any question about that. It's not an official diagnosis in the DSM, the manual we all used to diagnose, but it's something that I have a lot of experience working with men who have struggled with compulsive sexual behavior. So, kind of like the way I think about alcoholism, it's sort of like that's a label, sex addict's a label. What I'm more concerned about is, how is this thing, whatever it is, how is it impacting your life? Is it getting in the way of relationships? Is it getting in the way of like being productive and doing work or anything you will really want to do with yourself or your life? Is it causing some kind of harm, physical or mental? If the answer is no, then it's not alcoholism. We're not, people have different tolerances. Um, People have different relationship with sex. So that's kind of the way I think about it. Is my question is always, how is it impacting your life? Not, are you an alcoholic or are you a sex addict? And if it's impacting your life in a way that doesn't work for you, like let's work on that. And like kind of as best we can keep the labels over here. I feel that way about pretty much
Yeah,
all the work I do. It can be helpful to guide us, but it's not, often it gets in the way, I think, and also creates stigma, and no one wants to label themselves with as something like that. But
yeah. Okay, last question. In looking at the Integrity Reset website, tons of great information there. Again, I'll put the link to that in the show notes. You've got a free guide. People can put in their email address and you'll share with them 5 mistakes men make after an affair. There's one in particular that just stands out to me, and I just was wondering if you could expand on
sure.
the difference between guilt and shame and why it matters.
Yeah. So just in a simple, I guess a simple explanation of the difference is that shame is really about our sense of self. So, if we feel shame about something, we feel that we are bad. It's about the whole of us. I am terrible. I did a thing and I'm a terrible person because I did a thing, as opposed to just accepting the fact that we did a terrible thing, but we're a good person perhaps who did a terrible thing. Shame is very debilitating. People tend to shut down in shame. It's very hard to approach shame because it's so overwhelming for a lot of people. So the way this looks in terms of the work with the integrity reset is, if a man is stuck in a shame cycle, they often pull away, they withdraw, they have a hard time kind of even facing themselves and reframing kind of what they did as, as the issue, their choice to do this thing rather than go and talk to their partner when they were unhappy about something or dissatisfied. um, Helping them to recognize that they could have made and should make different choices, helping them get to a place where they can, through what I was talking about, getting to know the self. That's a whole different animal. If we're a terrible person, then we're a terrible person. It's like there's nowhere to go. And I do see a lot of guys shut down in that. They have a really hard time stepping forth because of that. So they'll do some of the things during the repair phase, when they're in couples therapy. They'll do some things that are counter to support for rebuilding. They will withdraw. They will try to rush through because it's so intolerable to hold shame, to feel shame. They won't want to address it and talk about it, or even sit with a partner who needs to express anger and frustration at them. Shame is nearly impossible to sit with for that reason. Um, and so it's really important to parse out this difference, and to help men move out of shame so that they're not in that constricted, helpless feeling place of, ultimately it ends up shifting the focus a little bit more on them because they're struggling and kind of pulling their partner into that. And often partners are not wanting men to feel like they're the worst person in the world. They're just wanting them to take responsibility for what they did and keep showing up in the healthy ways that they have, and new healthy ways around, often, communication. So probably a lot of words to explain. I think I said I was going to explain it quickly, but in terms of the work I do, that's where I see the difference. And a lot
Oh,
of
I
men
love
just
it.
fall into shame like a black hole, and they need help getting out of it and to looking at the things they've done in a different way.
Yeah. Well said. I think it was the perfect answer, and I know I benefited from everything you shared today, and I hope and trust that everyone who watches will as well. James, it's been truly a pleasure, such a joy to have this conversation with you. Again, I'll put links to your practice and your integrity reset in the show notes, and yeah, let's talk again in the future. I'm going to see how things can progress, and really super curious to see how Integrity Reset evolves.
Great. Thanks, Antoine. I really appreciated the conversation with you today.
Me too.